Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, removing barriers to grow your people. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and with me today is Dan Michelson. Dan is the founder and CEO of InCommon, a for-purpose company that helps companies turn culture into a strategy that drives productivity, engagement by ensuring everyone feels connected and part of the core. He has over 20-plus year track record of helping to build high-performing, high-growth companies with world-class cultures. In his upcoming book, Holy Shift, Moving Your Company Forward to the Future of Work, Dan helps leaders at every level of a company move forward to the future of work using common sense, data-driven approach. Holy Shift combines a reflection of how we got to where we are now with deep research as to how companies are managing this moment. Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, Dan Michelson.
Well, thank you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity. Really excited to talk to you.
Well, first off, Dan, why do you do what you do?
You know what? It's why do any of us do what we do? I think the thing for me that's super interesting right now is that we're all living through an enormous shift in how and why we work. So why we do what we do is changing, I think, for everybody. The time we're living through is probably the single biggest and fastest change in how we work in human history. So I think you mentioned it up front, but I've been in leadership roles for 2 decades. One is the CMO of a public company and the other is a CEO of a private company. And they really became top tier companies when it comes to Glassdoor, right? That employee experience and how people feel, which has an enormous impact on your product, has an enormous impact on your customers, right? It's a huge part of building a company that's built to last. But during the pandemic, things started to shift. And I was coming up on 10 years as CEO. So these challenges in the workplace were really intriguing to me. And I'm like, if I'm struggling with it, I think everybody is. So that's what I've been spending my time on. Why I'm doing what I'm doing is my kids are entering the workforce. And I think we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to make work better than it was in the past and use this opportunity instead of a kind of for the conflict that's coming from it that you see in a lot of workplaces, use it instead as a catalyst to make things better and move things forward.
Well, tell me more about your book, Holy Shift, Moving Your Company Forward to the Future of Work.
So my step back was, okay, hold on here. If what we've been doing for the last 100 years, which is work is really defined as a time and place, right? We go to work at this time, we work at this place. Well, that's changed everywhere in our lives, right? So you think of a kid going to school. School work isn't necessarily done in school anymore. My daughter just graduated, went to school for 4 years, did pretty well. I don't think she ever went to the library. So we know that work can be done anywhere at any time for many jobs. With that said, that's confusing. So how do we take this moment and create momentum from it? That's what I was interested in trying to understand. So I really looked at 3 things. I looked at 1, how do you see the shift? How do you understand what's happening? What has changed? 2 is, how do you shift your mindset? So how do you think differently about the future than the past? And the last one is, how do you make shift happen? So how do you drive change in a way that's meaningful and really thoughtful and high impact for everyone in your company? There's a saying, you probably heard it, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, during the pandemic, it ate it for lunch and dinner too. So now we have to take this opportunity to turn culture into, quote, the strategy for moving a company forward. And really what I've spent my time on is coming up with this model. It was referenced before called CORE, which ties to the 4 elements that can have a big impact on somebody in terms of their pride and purpose that they feel in their work, their sense of connection and community. But from a CEO or leadership or board perspective, the things that drive productivity, employee engagement, and retention, the big 3 that those folks in leadership really care the most about with their team, turns out there's 4 things that highly correlate to those 3 things. And 1 is a sense of community. So do I feel like I belong? 2 is opportunity. Do I feel like I have a future? 3 is relationships. Do I have trusting or toxic relationships? And 4, experiences. Am I getting tangible, solid experiences that help me grow? So that's an acronym: community, opportunity, relationships, experiences, CORE. And I think the real game plan for leaders or managers moving forward, anyone who's trying to pull people from where they are to the next level is to bring as many people into that core as you possibly can. And that's really what this book is all about. It's essentially a playbook of 50 plays that you can run to make progress, to bring people back to that core.
It's definitely challenging for leaders. I read just this week that we have the CEO of Amazon saying, hey, listen, if you don't come back to the office, it's not going to work out for you here. And then the New York Times unions submitting an injunction against the New York Times to make them return to work. So we have really a vast spectrum of reactions to what's going on. And how's this going to play? How's it going to play out in your view?
Well, there's a saying that William Gibson came up with, so I can't take credit for it. The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So what I can tell you is Amazon actually didn't bring people back to work. So what Amazon's actually doing is saying, hey, we want you to be together with us 3 days a week. So that means the majority of the time. So it used to be 5 days a week in the office and 2 maybe at home, I guess you could say. So 5 out of 7. Now it's 3 out of 7. That's a radical change. The problem is the packaging and the positioning of this is exactly what you just described. They're saying we want to bring you back to work. Back implies backwards. To work means you weren't working when you're not here. That implies a lack of trust between those who lead and those who work for them. And that's toxic. That is not the right packaging and positioning for how to attack this problem. Because the simple facts are, you have a tremendous amount of benefit from a career perspective of being together with other people, right? Mentoring, all of the experiences that you gain from being around other people, all of the growth that you have and that opportunity in your career, a lot of it directly actually correlates to the number of relationships and the strength of those relationships. So the problem is if we could reposition it from bringing back to bringing forward, right? And the way that we're going to bring the company forward is by bringing you together, and we're going to do it in a thoughtful manner. That's a much more positive, much more productive message. And that's really what I outline in the book is there's a much more compassionate, empathetic, and evolutionary way to think about this moment. And once again, there's been a lot of change. It takes 66 days to form a new habit. It's been over 1,000 days since the pandemic hit. So it's safe to say that there's going to be a little bit of friction in terms of what comes next. In our data, we did research with 1,671 CEOs in over 50 countries and 97 industries. Okay. And the one consistent problem in all of those settings, and once again, we're talking about different countries, different industries, and different companies, different industries, different countries. The one problem is there's a crisis of confidence when it comes to company culture. Everyone's feeling it in some form or fashion. So the opportunity for leaders is when things change, whether it's from a regulatory perspective, a competitive perspective, or from a social perspective in terms of what's happened in the workplace, the great leaders take that as an opportunity, as a catalyst to drive change, as opposed to a constraint in terms of where they're going. They need to pivot. So that's why the book is really called Holy Shift, right? It's like, oh my God, is this a major change? We've gone from 18 out of every 100 people in the world primarily working out of home. So before the pandemic, 18 out of every 100 people in the world, their primary workspace was out of, quote, the office. Now it's 54 out of every 100. So that's a tripling. And the one thing we know about work is whatever happens in our work affects our life. Whatever happens in our life affects our work. There is no work-life balance. In the book, we refer to it as life flow. We've gone from workflow, where everything revolves around our work, to life flow, where there's no work life or home life. There's just one life. And finding that right way of bringing people in and engaging them in a way that's productive and positive is really the game to be played right now. It's a huge opportunity for people.
And Dan, we have an exit question we ask all of our guests, and that is, who is a hero of yours and why are they a hero?
Well, I'm going to go a little bit hyper personal and maybe a little bit overly emotional on that one. But so I'll say my mom. And the reason is because my father left when I was before I turned 1 year old. And my mom was an unemployed school teacher at the time with $200 in her bank account, 2 kids, and her father had just passed away 6 months prior, right? So a new kid, a fresh divorce, lost her father, and no job. So that's really how we started her life. And you think about people who are heroes, it's really based on the circumstances that they face and how they overcome them, right? And so I don't have a better or more close example of anyone in my life than that. So that's what I would say. And the one thing I would tell you is that her one lesson that got through to me was just try to be a good person. Just try to leave the room a little bit better than the one you walked into. That's really what drives me and what motivates me and what I get the most joy out of.
And lastly, Dan, how can somebody contact you?
Well, two ways. They can check out our company at InCommon.com. That's InCommon.com. Or you can go check out the book at theholyshiftbook.com.
All right. Dan Michelson, founder and CEO of InCommon, author of Holy Shift, Moving Your Company Forward to the Future of Work. Thanks so much for being a guest on the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate the conversation.
Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.